Okay, we've got another tier list today. This is really the last one I could think of that would be useful, at least for now. But I do think this will be quite useful. We're going to look at all the hexes that Selini has to offer. There's 8 of them, and we'll talk about them in a little bit more depth. I do think hexes right now, after this latest patch, are in a much better place than they've been. I know previously they were pretty disappointing. People didn't really feel like they were worth picking if they had a choice between rooms. They're pretty disappointed if they started with Selini. But now, yeah, I do. I think they're quite strong for the most part, at least somewhat competitive with some of the other options you've got. So we're going to start here with the first one, Phase Shift. Phase Shift, easily my personal favorite. I think it's the gold standard for hexes. So the effect here, it's going to make everything else move 80% slower for 4 seconds, and it gets ready after you've spent 100 magic. Now, they did change it in the last patch that now, while you're having that slowdown effect, so during that 4-second period, any magic you spend is not going to contribute to the next phase shift that you would normally use. You used to be able to just chain them back to back to back, which was totally busted. I can see why they changed it. But they did also make a change so Chronos can now be affected by any sort of time dilation effects. So that means that phase shift works on everything in the game. It works on regular encounters, works on Eris, who's currently at least the last boss on the surface, and then it's going to work on Chronos being the last boss of the underworld. So whether you're struggling in, just normal rooms, or it's the typical hardest encounters in the game, the end bosses, well, it's going to be able to help out in some way. So what does it actually help you do? Well, obviously, survivability, I think, is the first thing that comes to mind. If everything's moving 80% slower, and it feels like, by the way, like 99% slower, it feels like the game just goes to an absolute crawl. You can essentially dodge everything. It's very, very, very rare that you get hit unless you do something incredibly greedy. You sort of step out of line. There's a few animations, like the Cyclops ring gets a little bit messed up with it, so you've got an excuse for getting hit a couple times. But for the most part, you really shouldn't get hit for that 4-second period. But as well, you're going to be able to push a lot of damage during that 4-second period. So during a regular encounter, it's great if you get swarmed by a bunch of enemies. That can always be nice. But really, I think where this shines is in the boss battles, those Guardian battles. You slow things down. It's kind of like when you're just invincible with mint condition or something. You just get to lay into enemies with everything you got. Spend all your magic or just use your most powerful attacks. And because you could do it with Reckless Abandon, you're able to push so much damage. And then 100 magic to be able to use it again. For a lot of aspects, that's really, really easy to do. So something like Charon, it's easy. Momus, you love spending stuff. Really, any of the axes, if you want to do like the Omega attack on them, I find it quite easy. Plus, the Moon, the Arcana card, is now also pretty easy to activate with some, what I think are desirable cards around it, at least a lot of times. So you're going to have your Hex naturally ticking up to be activatable anyway. So lots more ways to activate it. Yes, you can't infinitely chain this thing, but super effective. So what I think you want to target when you get this, I do think all of a sudden the Path of Stars options become very, very worth it. If you're faced with an option in, say, the Morning Fields or something like that, a lot of times I'm going to look for those rooms. If it's purchasable on the surface, I'm almost always going to target it. You want increased duration, so it'll be like +1 second increments you want to choose. There's a blue effect that's actually going to set it off, or it's going to charge up your Hex entirely when a death is triggered, and it'll even trigger on the pin, so during that little 10-second timer, which, by the way, I haven't even talked about. This will slow down the timer on the pin and slow down over time if you've gone over the total allotted time you have with the Pact. Where you're taking that 5 damage, even that is slowed down. So that's really what you want to target if you get it. Once you've got that, you're pretty much good. There's a few other options that are nice to haves in there, but you don't necessarily need to continue targeting the Path of Stars. But yeah, I think that kind of rounds it out. Incredibly strong. It works with the pin. It's just the greatest thing that Selini can possibly give you. Target it all the time. Twilight Curse. Okay, so Twilight Curse, this is the morph ability. It's going to turn a bunch of stuff into sheep. I'm going to go ahead and drop this in C. So the way this is described, you're going to cast morph, inflict morph on up to 5 susceptible foes, and it's ready after you spend 50 magic. So what is a susceptible foe? Well, it's not a guardian, for one, which is the biggest downside of this. It's a hex that doesn't help at all with guardian fights. Well, at least not its base kit. It doesn't help at all. But it does work on mini-bosses, which is pretty nice. You very often want to take mini-bosses just as a way to save time. It's very predictable for pin triggers. Yeah, and some of them are quite easy. Once you get used to the fight, it's very predictable, whereas a regular encounter room, you don't really know what you're in for. There's a lot more randomness in those encounters. So what cases does this actually work, and what cases does it not? Well, the first thing, and this actually applies to phase shift as well, the cast time on these hexes and a lot of others are actually the biggest downside of it. If you're running with any kind of time limit, the time is still going to continue to tick down while you're doing this little incantation to actually use the ability. You can turn 5 regular enemies in a normal encounter into sheep, which is fine. It's going to negate some damage just in that they can't really do anything. They can't attack you. But for the time that it takes, if you're running with a deadline, it's just often not worth it. Of course, if you're not running with a deadline, all these things get a lot better. Anything with a cast time, you don't have to worry about that trade-off, that cost. But where this actually gets good for other cases, even if you're running the deadline, is when you start to upgrade that Path of Stars. So what I really like, there's an ability in there. I believe it's a rare. I've got this thing over here. One of the rare cases. Yeah, you're actually going to be able to, it's called Orchestration. You're going to be able to pull all the morph afflicted foes into your cast. And they kind of just teleport there. So the way it works, you use morph, 5 enemies are going to get hit by it, then you drop your cast, and then suddenly there's 5 sheep sitting in your cast. And what you can do is you can combo that with the ability to, whenever a morph-afflicted foe is slain, a blast deals 300 damage to nearby foes. So if you have something that can deal damage to everyone that's in that circle, you can basically cause a giant explosion. It's really, really cool. And you can do this during the Guardian encounter. So if you're against Kronos, he's got 6 minions. You can hit 5 of those, or if you upgrade it, you can actually hit all 6. Then you drop your cast, you pull them in, you blow them up with something like Persephone. It works great. Charon, amazing. Do a whirlwind from the axe, whatever you want. And then it's like this 1800 damage explosion on top of Kronos. It's very, very effective. The problem with that is it does require all this kind of setup to be useful, and then it only finally becomes useful at the end of that, whereas I think sort of along the way, getting to those Guardian encounters until you've got those upgrades, it really just falls flat. The regular effect of turning things to sheep, yeah, it saves some of the danger in normal encounters, but I think you're better off with a lot of other hexes in those cases. And then sometimes you're not even going to get offered the upgrades with Path of Stars. You'd have to force it through the Keepsake or something like that, which is often just not worth it. So for the most part, I would recommend avoiding it, but there are a few actual pretty good use cases in here. Okay, this next one. I don't know why I've got these out of order on here. I actually have to look for. Okay, this is Total Eclipse. Here we go. Total Eclipse. You're gonna basically be dropping a meteor I'm going to put this into A. So the way that this works is described as your Hex blasts the target for 1,000 damage after 4 seconds. And it's ready after you spend 90 magic. So when you use it, you'll see there's like this big circle, this kind of transparent circle that sits on the ground for 4 seconds. And then after that 4 seconds, you have a giant meteor comes down, and that's what deals 1,000 damage. It's a very, very big area. The cost is pretty low. I think it used to be a lot higher, like 160 or something like that, maybe even 200. It was very significant. Now you can actually cast it fairly often. And the thing that I love about this, that I absolutely love, the cast time is basically instant. You can just be in the middle of an attack combo and then like just absolutely touch the hex button, whatever it is. I've got it on like the right trigger. You're gonna have a circle either where you're at, or if you want to be a little bit more focused, you can aim it a bit and then just keep doing what you're doing. So it's really just a bonus on top of what you got. And when I first saw this, I thought this is gonna be hard to land. Like 4 seconds, everything's moving around all the time. Is it really going to hit stuff very often? But what I found in practice is I'm hitting stuff all the time. A lot of times in 4 seconds, enemies will move out of it and then back into it. You've got so much movement and time. During regular encounters, you can drop it almost anywhere in the room and someone will make their way over there. So you're going to clear those encounters faster. It's going to end up being safer. The 1,000 damage is enough to kill a lot of stuff, or at least strip off all their armor. Very, very good. Now, it does fall off with Vow of Rebuke. That's at least one thing to keep in mind, where they're going to eat that free hit. Not the greatest in that case. But usually you're not turning that on until very, very, very high fears. The other thing that I really like about it, some of the upgrades are just, they're all right, they're fine. It's a little bit more damage. It's just kind of okay. I think you can drop, yeah, you get an extra Moon Blast. That one's also quite good, but that's all the way up to Epic. The one that I really like and that I would recommend targeting, it's called Eminence here. So after you use your Hex, you're impervious until the blast. So it's kind of like another way to get mint condition. So for that 4 second period, you're also invincible. So now you can cast this thing very, very often push a lot of damage when it drops, and you're invincible for that whole 4 second period. So even if you totally whiff, it's kind of the same thing I mentioned with Phase Shift. You can push a lot of damage, you can, dodge attacks or whatever. If you find yourself in a really precarious situation you don't know how to get out of, just slam your Hex and you'll save some damage. Yeah, very, very good. If Phase Shift is not offered, this is usually what I'm hoping for next. Okay, what is this next one? Wolf Howl. Wolf Howl I find tough. I'm going to put this thing at the top of C. I think some people like this a lot more than I do. It's not the worst. It does have some effect. So what this is going to do is you sort of jump up from where you're at, and then in a similar sort of way around this area of effect, a much smaller circle, you're going to dash down and hit the ground, dealing 200 damage, and it's ready after you spend 40 magic. So where is it good? Early on, this is actually quite nice. If you end up starting a run and you're offered Selini right off the bat, well, Selini, you're going to be able to spend your 40 magic pretty quick. 200 damage is pretty substantial in the first few rooms. You can kill most things in one hit. And yeah, you can just constantly do it. The problem is this drops off very, very fast. Where once you get, let's say, an attack or a special or whatever boon you need to really get your build going, you're normally going to have higher DPS than whatever this is offering. This 200 is not great. There are some things to help upgrade it along the way. You can get a little bit more damage. So let's see. Yeah, bigger area, another 50 damage. You can deal a little bit of damage as you're rising up. it's okay, but it doesn't scale nearly as well as your normal attacks. So you tend to have a DPS loss as it goes on. I really only like this in the first region. Outside of the first region, I think where the big benefit is, you're temporarily invincible while you do that effect. And every now and then that can save you from a really dangerous situation. So a couple times, for example, I've been in the Eris fight. I don't really care about dealing 200 damage in the Eris fight. My build is online. I can deal way more damage in the couple seconds that it takes to cast this. I don't want to waste the time. But sometimes that like hazard bomb effect, it seems like there's just no escape. You get this really unlucky pattern. Well, after you see that, you can just push this button, rise up into the air. You're totally invincible as all the bombs fall to the ground, and then you just continue the fight, and it'll be back online very, very quickly. So I actually like this as more of a defensive ability when you're just in panic mode to go ahead and press that button. Otherwise, yeah, I don't really recommend it. There's also a niche use case just because it's very, very cheap. If you get upgrades that increase your damage or anything like that while it's active, like attack speed or something, while it's active, then, you know, it's very quickly online. You're going to have that online for a longer period. So not the worst, but yeah, I think really only worth targeting right at the start if you're offered it. Okay, so next one here, Darkside. Darkside, I'm going to go ahead and drop into D. So Darkside, it's going to make you invincible for 5 seconds. You're totally impervious. It's ready after AD magic is spent, but it's also going to change your move set. So your regular attack is kind of like you're shooting out this, I don't know, flamethrower, this dark flamethrower thing. And your special becomes this ring that moves out and then back in. Both things deal very, very little damage. They were buffed, but once again, this falls into that territory of like, man, I'm losing damage when I use it, and it takes time to actually turn on. Like, this is another one with these casts that actually have some, or sorry, a hex that has some cast time is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, it's really not appealing if you got any kind of time limit. You're going to lose out on damage, which isn't great. So really, where is it good? Well, it's good if you don't have a time limit. So if you're just kind of starting out, this is something that lets you play a little bit safer and just gives you a tiny bit of free damage. How much do you actually deal in those 5 seconds? To a single target, it's probably like 400 damage, maybe like 300 to 400 damage if you just sit there and focus on one target. You can do a little bit more with the AoE effect. But the upgrades don't really make it all that worth getting. Where I do see it slightly being useful as you sort of turn the fears up and you get a little bit more experience with the game, it's very much in the same way that Wolf Howl can be useful. If you're in a pinch and you just need to be invincible, it's like, oh man, I'm going to die unless I just activate this thing to run out of here, relocate, something like that. It's okay, but you gotta realize you're giving up DPS, you're giving up time, yeah, and that's the only thing you're really getting in return. So, yeah, generally don't recommend it because it's just so niche, and you're often having to give something else up to choose this. There's a lot of better things that are going to be here, but yeah, if you are sort of forced into it, you do end up picking it. I recommend you just sit on it, wait till a time that's really dangerous, and then just think about it as a way to be invincible. Okay, Moonwater. So Moonwater, this becomes one of these things that's like very hard to rate. Where do I put it? I'll put it into B. But if you've seen any of my other tier lists, the reasoning for this is going to be that the healing effects drop off at higher fears. So if you're kind of considering it across all fears, at higher fears, this isn't able to restore any health, or it's going to be like half health. So I guess I should mention what it does. So it restores 15 health up to 3 times, and then those 3 times reset every time you use any fountain. And it's going to be ready after you spend 70 magic. So it's like 45 healing, usually once per region, but you can also hit those fountain chambers within the region to reset it. But yeah, like I said, at higher fears, it just drops off to literally nothing, which is no good. So if you're playing at low fears, where would I put this? Probably A, maybe even S. I would put it below phase shift for sure, and I would put it above, what is this called? Total Eclipse. But yeah, whether that's S or A, not really sure. And then obviously it's like, you know, it's F, it's unusable, it's Z, whatever. If you're at high fears, it doesn't really do anything. Some of the upgrades, I guess, along the way can kind of work out. Again, if it's like, well, your Hex is active, you can get some faster attack speed or more damage. It can also give you some gold on use, but very, very, very niche cases. You never really want to take it. But okay, let's talk about the case where you are just kind of starting out. You don't have those pacts on that are going to reduce healing. Why is it so good? Well, you're new, probably, or you're not super experienced with the game. Probably means you're getting hit a lot. So getting health back is pretty good. 45 health per each region. It's a significant amount, and the nice thing is you get to choose when it happens. So usually what I see newer players running into, this is certainly what my experience was as well, you get used to the regular encounters pretty quickly, and then you start to struggle on the bosses. The Guardian fights, you're going to lose the majority of your health, hopefully not a Death Defiance, and then like, whew, you get your fountain and you're back good for the next region. You try to get through it, and the same pattern repeats. But this gives you healing during those Guardian fights to really help you not have to use a Death Defiance, or if you're at the very end of a run, it's just going to help you complete the run, which is a lot different than going to a shop and buying it, or running into health in some random region along the way. Yeah, having that sort of choice over it's a big deal. But as well, the upgrades with this thing are incredible. So not only can you get more uses, I think I've got this as high as like 7 or 8 uses, but it also has an ability along the Path of Stars, which, by the way, you really want to target the Path of Stars with this thing, where if you haven't used up all your charges, so normally if you have 3 charges, you go to a fountain, you're still at 3 charges, right? It won't go above that maximum. But if you haven't used them up, it's going to add an additional 3, so you'll go up to 6. And then, we got to skip past the lyrics music here. Yeah, so then, I forgot what I was saying, but here we are with no script. Oh yeah, so then you can jump up to 6, 7, 8 total uses, something like that, right? You get the additional 3 plus whatever you've capped it out as, and you can increase the amount that it heals. So when this thing is upgraded a lot, you can get into these setups that are like each instance of this restores, 30, 35 health, something like that. And you've got 6, 7, 8 uses by the time you get to Kronos or something, right? Your real scary Guardian fight. So how much life are you healing? Could be like over 200. It's absolutely crazy. The cost is relatively high, so one thing to note is once you start getting up to those crazy numbers, because you've got to spend 70 magic, maybe top up your health a little bit before that. Not every build is going to be able to spend 500 magic or something all that easily, especially if you're trying to not die. That's the whole thing, being able to recover health. So yeah, be a little conscious of that as you're sort of moving between the regions. But yeah, at low fears, this one, I still think it's just behind phase shift. Phase shift is going to let you be safe and push a lot of damage. This keeping you alive, it is going to obviously increase the amount of overall damage you can do. But I just think from my experience using them, phase shift tends to be just a smidge better. And then there's those very, very few niche cases of like gold or whatever. If you're forced into moon water at very high fears, it's something to consider. Okay, what do we got here? Lunar Ray. I hate Lunar Ray. I hate it more than I hate Darkside. So Lunar Ray, it's going to turn your Hex into a beam that you fire. It says it deals 900 damage over 3 seconds, which feels like the longest 3 seconds on the planet. I'll warn you that. But it's ready after you spend 30 magic. So it's ready like all the time. It's sort of like a ticking effect. I think it deals damage in like 30 damage increments, and you can just hold it there. It does auto-target quite well. The range is pretty far. It will like adjust depending on where you turn to. But why is this so bad? Well, you're just standing still. You're not staggering, you're not doing anything special. So if you're using this against like a Guardian, which, you know, a lot of these you want to be able to use, you're just going to sit there doing nothing. A little bit of damage. A lot of times less damage than you're able to normally push. Maybe comparable damage. If your build's not super strong, you could say comparable damage. But yeah, you're a sitting duck. You're an absolute target for this thing. You're going to get whooped up on. You're going to take a bunch of damage. You can cancel out of it with a dash. So say you can deal like 200 damage and then go ahead and dash. But once again, it feels like one of those things. Well, why don't I just do 200 damage with my normal attacks and specials? It's really nothing additional. But there is a case where this can be useful. It just requires a lot more setup. Again, across the path of stars, you can get things to increase the damage. You can get a little AoE effect. You can shoot at 3 beams with it, I believe. But the one that actually ends up being pretty good, you can leave it at a location and it works like a turret. So you press the button and wherever you were at the time, it's going to sit there and just blast whatever it can focus on, and then you're free to move around. It solves the whole problem of sitting there doing nothing. But in my opinion, this thing, if you don't have that, it's worth using like 0.1% of the time. And if you have it, it's actually good. Anytime you fill it up, yeah, you're going to drop it in a fight. But like I said, a lot of times you don't have an option to even get the upgrades. You're not offered them. You have to upgrade a fair bit along the path to actually be able to hit those rares. So sometimes this also has to be one of the hexes that's boosted by that moon effect. I forget what it's actually called, but you know, as it moves down the list, you get extra Path of Stars choices. I just don't like taking it and not knowing if it's ever going to be useful, whereas most of these are going to have at least some niche use case, just even in its base kit. So yeah, for that reason, I'm putting it at the bottom. And then finally, we've got Night Bloom. Night Bloom, I quite like. I guess I'll put it below Moonwater. Again, kind of a weird one to rank. But it's good. What it's going to do, it's going to raise... It says raises one random slain foe from this encounter to fight for you for 12 seconds, and that it costs 60 magic. As far as I can tell, it's always the last foe that you kill. I've used this a lot, and unless I'm totally out of my mind, it's always the last foe that you killed. With the exception, I believe, of the enemies that cause darkness around them. You can't revive them. So it'll be the previous one to that you've killed. So yeah, where is this good? Where is it not? Well, for one, these enemies that you raise, they're essentially unkillable. I don't know if they actually have like a real health bar, but you'll never ever kill them. And their health bar seems to like never drop. So they've either got something like 1,000,000 health, or they're just literally invincible. But they will take damage, and there's some funny cases where you'll have friendly fire. So sometimes it's a negative because you'll auto-target them, or they'll get in the way of an attack or something like that. But it can be a positive if you're running something like Cersei. You can actually just purposefully hit your own guy repeatedly to charge up your meter and then go ahead and use it. There's probably a few other things where you could take advantage of actually inflicting damage upon your own minion. It's kind of a funny little side effect. But not only do these things have a lot of life and they never die, they deal a ton of damage. It's crazy. They were nerfed in, I believe, the last patch, and it doesn't feel like it. If you just get a regular minion, like you're not even really focused on it, you raise just whoever happened to die last, you'll notice a pretty significant amount of damage against like guardians, for example. That's where you're probably paying attention to health bars the most. You'll see a significant tick. But if you actually summon someone with some purpose, so you summon werewolves are very, very good. Those punchy dudes, the dudes that punch like 1,000 miles an hour, are the greatest thing ever. You'll see they will melt Cerberus. They will kill all regular enemies and encounters before you can. The rat summoner guys, the satyrs, I think they are. Their magic effects are pretty good. Those are probably the 3 top ones. Punchy dude being number 1. If you, focus on those, you can get crazy amounts of damage. It's so good. So what you really want to do with this Night Bloom, there's an upgrade. It's a rare upgrade that will make this last indefinitely. Now, I'm not sure if it's for the location or for the encounter. Let's go digging into this. Fight indefinitely in that location. Okay. So in a boss fight, they'll sit there forever. They don't last between the Chronos shift from phase 1 to phase 2, unfortunately. But in like the Cerberus fight, they'll last forever. If Eris summons minions, they'll last for that whole thing. And yeah, you can just get insane amounts of damage. It's going to help with time. Obviously, it's going to help with your safety because they can just take care of the boss a lot of times without even your help. At least if you get the punchy dudes. But as well, along the way to getting this upgrade, the other just normal upgrades are pretty good. So we've got Ray Servants deal plus 10% damage. That's pretty significant when they're already dealing good damage. They take 20% of any damage you would normally take. I love it. And then there's another rare where they'll move and attack 50% faster. I've lucked into this before where I get to add tons of stuff along this path of stars, and it's absolutely busted. I'm telling you, it's just totally crazy. So why is it only in B? I'm really talking this thing up. Well, the base raising someone in an encounter kind of sucks in normal fights. It takes time to cast, which is really the downside here from dropping a meteor. That time, if you have any kind of time limit, means that it's usually not worth using in a regular encounter unless it's an encounter that has, right, the perfect minion that you kill at the perfect time that you think it will kill stuff in 12 seconds to justify the time spent, which is quite a lot. That's got to really fall in line. Otherwise, it's very good in even just the base kit. It's pretty good in Guardian fights, but as you get those upgrades, this is just one of the ones that scales really well. It scales really well. You want to definitely make sure you're targeting the Path of Stars upgrades. So for that reason, it's like okay base kit, has some benefit. It's fine. It's pretty easy to activate, but if you can lean into it, very good. Otherwise, yeah, I recommend not using it in regular encounters with any kind of time limit. So, yeah, that's it for hexes. Hopefully, this is helpful for, actually making a decision across these 8. Like I said, I do think hexes are actually in a pretty good place. There's a lot of benefits to them. I wouldn't shy away from them if they're offered in shops or they're offered as a rune reward. Really consider it, especially for these 3 here and Moonwater if you're at lower fears. Anything that's B up, I do think is quite worth taking. And yeah, actually going out of your way to target and getting those Path of Stars. So, like I said, I think this is the only other tier list video I could really think of that'd be useful, but I'm open to suggestion. If anybody's got ideas, feedback, whatever, always happy to hear it. These things are fun for, generating that type of discussion. So hopefully it was useful, and until next time.